Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on a sunny day in a rather deserted city of Westminster, it must be said, as once again we put the topic of leadership under the spotlight. I'm Scott Challoner and I'm joined on today's programme by Joanne Bell. Joanne is an accountant and director at Bell's Accountants, a firm based in the historic county of Kent. Joanne, welcome to the programme and it's great to have you on the air with us today.
Hi Scott, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure having you on the air with us. Now, Joanne, the purpose of this podcast series, first and foremost, is to gather together a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership. So what I'd like to understand is what that word leader actually means to you personally.
Of course. So for me, leadership is mainly about responsibility. You obviously have a responsibility for the people you are leading in terms of their welfare, their progression, their direction. And that means that you have to take into consideration all those factors with whatever decisions that you make. So you can't make decisions just based on profit or your own benefit in business. You need to consider the impact on all those people because they look to you for direction.
Absolutely right. And in times such as the current situation with COVID-19, for example, where there is so much uncertainty, I think that leaders being very self-aware of the fact that people are looking to them for answers and they may not necessarily have all of the answers at the moment, that can really put them under pressure, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the key for me so far has been communication and honesty and transparency. So it's important to keep communicating with your team as much as you possibly can with all the changes that are going on, and also to help them feel connected because obviously we're all dotted around at the moment working from home, but predominantly so that they feel safe and secure, that they know that things are being dealt with and considered properly, and then also to consult with them because we as leaders do not have all the answers ourselves. So I've been regularly putting out questionnaires to say, well, you know, how would you feel about this if the government say we are safe to go back to work? Is that something you would feel happy to do, or do you prefer to continue working from home, etc.? Just to kind of gather a pool of opinion because I think as a leader people will listen to what you say and obviously do what you ask of them because their jobs depend on it, but they may do it resentfully or not feel happy and comfortable, and that could mean you to lose valuable members of staff. So it's important to keep that consultation process going.
It's hugely important, and it's hugely important to maintain communication as well, especially when we're no longer meeting together physically. And when a leader does have a close-knit team and relies on that very much community feel, I suppose, if you will, that can actually be quite a challenge. But keeping people with you and allowing people to continue to go along with you is also incredibly important. And so I think one of the key things that leaders have to take into consideration, especially during this time, is they've got to make clear that they do continue to care about their employees and that their opinions really are valued, as you've said there, Joanne.
Absolutely, and mentally I think it's a huge struggle for people to be at home in the office, and one of the things we've been looking at is how people are feeling about making decisions independently, because obviously historically when we've been in an office environment they've just been able to ask a quick question of their colleagues, what do you think about this, and it can lead to a feeling of being quite isolated working remotely because they don't have the ability to ask those quick questions. So we have been quite reliant on technology. We've set up sort of WhatsApp groups for departments and individual offices. We've obviously set up Zoom so that we can have face-to-face conversations either individually or as departments or as offices. But to some extent, I have had some feedback from my team to say that we feel we've communicated better than we ever have done because we've made a conscious effort to have structured communication where we've got scheduled team meetings throughout the week. That maybe wasn't happening as much before, and also it's across the boundaries of the office because we're a multi-site operation. We have 4 offices in total. Everything was quite insular inside the individual offices. They ran things their own way, whereas now we're having across the board team meetings and actually learning a lot from that as well. So positives have come from it, definitely.
They do say, don't they, that you learn an awful lot more about yourself and your team when you're facing times of adversity than when things are going well. And it certainly seems in your case as if that's proven true.
Indeed. And one of the sayings I've always adhere to is that in times of challenge, it doesn't change people. What it does is brings out what's already there. So I think you really see what people are made of in times like this. You see the commitment they have to their role and to you as a leader and to the business as a whole, because it's very much on them now. You know, they are working independently. I cannot be watching over their shoulder to see that they're putting their hours in. And what we found actually is that there's been an increase in productivity, also because of the care they have for their clients. You know, we're accountants, so we've seen an awful lot of businesses, our clients who we've acted for a long time, who are in huge times of stress and struggle, and they're relying on us to feed back to them the information that is needed to get them through. So what help is available to the government, from the government? How can they access it? They're needing us to advise them on the way to go. So if anything, we've mostly down tools on the work that we do, the accounts and tax work, just so we can be there to reach out to as many as we can to advise and help them.
There's a lot of merit, isn't there, in giving people a little bit of independence to sort of take on their own leadership in a way, isn't there? Especially this time, because as you've said, it has actually increased productivity in certain ways. But also, I think having people sort of take on their own leadership, go out of their comfort zone, especially. I mean, it's proving to be quite a fruitful part of their overall development, isn't it? And it's fostering resilience in these people. It's not necessarily changing them, but it's really bringing out the best in them, if you will, as you say there.
Absolutely, and for me, I think that is the best demonstration of leadership, is that there is the right balance between autonomy and accountability. So you need to give people the freedom to do things the way they want to do them and practice and do their role in the way they want to do it. But you also need to hold them accountable. So that involves sort of making sure that their targets and goals that they're reaching, and that's for them as well as the business as a whole, because they'll most likely have their own targets in terms of personal development and things they want to learn and things they'd like to be doing more of and things they'd like to be doing less of. And unless you keep those lines of communication open, you won't be aware of that. And I think that's how people sometimes lose good members of staff, because they're not aware that actually that person didn't want to be involved in that element of the business anymore. They found it boring or whatever, or they'd rather be involved in going in a different direction, or there was some training they'd like to do. You know, they're not learning anything new.
So do you think that during this time you've had to fundamentally adapt your way of leading, or do you think that it's actually brought out the strengths in it and maybe just made it just that little bit better?
I think it's brought out the strengths, definitely. I think initially there was a panic, and I think from our element that was because we didn't know how many clients were going to be adversely affected. So obviously our service is more needed than ever from clients, but we have probably at least 20% of them who have lost all of their income entirely. Their businesses have just gone overnight. So that's restaurants, gyms, you know, those in the leisure industry, the hospitality, retail, and we didn't know how many were going to obviously not be able to pay our fees or reduce services, and so that was quite difficult to plan for in the coming weeks and months. And obviously even helping clients apply for the business interruption loans and things like that. You know, the banks are asking for forecasts of how much they need, and it's almost impossible to answer before the Prime Minister was able to give the roadmap, because we didn't know how long they were going to be closed for, or you know what their social distancing measures would be and whether they would be able to implement them. So it was quite difficult to assist them initially, and as I say, that caused us a worry as to what it would do with our income. But I think overall it definitely has shown the strength of the business as a whole and brought the team together, because we're all working for one goal, and that is to help the clients who have obviously been there for us for so many years.
Now, for the benefit of those tuning into this, we are recording this episode on the 11th of May 2020, and that comes just one day after Prime Minister Boris Johnson presented his roadmap out of the UK lockdown. And he didn't he, Joanna, provide some provisional dates as to when some businesses can hopefully expect to be recommencing their operations. Has that proven to be a source of encouragement for yourself and your clients in the short time since then, or is there still a little bit of a lack of clarity, do you think?
I think a bit of both. I think for some sort of small shops and some businesses who know they're able to adhere to social distancing, there was some reassurance there. For others, it's been more of a worry. I think namely the ones that were not mentioned. So gyms were an example of that. We've got a few sort of independent gyms. No mention was made of those. So we're not sure yet when they might be able to open. And the other thing I think was the fact that the Prime Minister spoke of the traffic light system. So the 1 to 5, which I think we all maybe knew that from common sense, but it hadn't been clarified as yet. But that, to a lot of people, indicated that this was not a thing that had an end. This is an ongoing thing that is likely to be, well, we're let out for a little while and then locked down again and then let out and then locked down. So again, from a planning perspective, from a cash flow perspective, very, very difficult to plan for if you're reliant on what level of threat the country is at to know whether you're going to be able to trade this week or this month. And lots of them, they still have rent to pay. I think that's the main issue with businesses with premises. That's the thing that they're going to struggle with the most. And it gets to the point, although there's loans and things like that available, but it's how far you want to go to get indebted when you don't know really if you have a viable business at the end of it, because everything depends on how long you're having to go without any income. So, I think a bit of both. Definitely more clarity is needed, but it was said at the time that more clarity would be given, so we can only really wait. The government are tackling this. They're trying to lead us through this in the same way as we're trying to lead our people, and it's obviously unprecedented times, not something that they've dealt with before.
Exactly right, and it is important in any sort of walk of leadership to maintain transparency and maintain clarity. But if you could be Prime Minister just for the day, Joanna, is there anything that you would fundamentally do differently, do you think?
I actually probably would have restricted the help a little more. As an accountant, obviously we've seen how many people have taken up, for example, the furlough scheme and other help, the grants and things like that. And I don't feel there's been a lot of policing in terms of it going to those who need it. It has been open to all, which is brilliant, but I think there are a fair few businesses who will have increased their profits because of it. They will have been given a grant or given the ability to furlough staff that were deemed non-essential, and that's great. But I think there would have been more in the pot for those who desperately need it, i.e. their income stopped day one, had it been maybe more sector specific or more controlled. Because I know now already the Chancellor speaking about the furlough scheme being unsustainable, and that is just simply because of the level of take-up. And I know sort of almost all of our client base who've got staff on the payroll have furloughed some or all, and that decision was made very, very quickly before there was any indication as to how much of their income would be impacted by it. And they've not done anything wrong at all in making that claim. They're fully entitled to do that because it was available to every UK business. But the difficulty of that is obviously the overall cost of it. I dread to think kind of what the tax bill is likely to be next year. For me, I probably would have. I think the level of help is incredible, unprecedented. But I would have made it more targeted and more sort of means tested rather than a kind of help everyone who asks for it kind of approach. And I think that was a lot down to the speed because they needed to get that money out the door quickly, knowing people were depending on it. That meant that there couldn't be too much policing of it or too much complication as to who's eligible and who isn't.
I think you raised some very interesting points there, Joanna, and one thing I would like to touch on as well is for those younger generations of people who are perhaps looking to venture into business themselves or maybe are about to take over leadership roles within different businesses, based upon the experience that you've had, not just, of course, running your own firm for the last 11 years, but also as an award winner of Kent's Businesswoman of the Year accolade last year, what sort of advice would you have to give to those younger generations of people going to venture into business?
There's a Darwin saying which I always refer back to, and that is that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, but the one most adaptable to change. And that to me has never been truer than in the current situation with the COVID-19, but also throughout my business journey. It's always been about adaptability. New technology, new regulation will come in that you have to adhere to, and you've got to be able to adjust or you will be left behind. And lots of the businesses that I've purchased from retiring accountants and those accountants have not been able to adjust. They've not wanted to adhere to things like making tax digital. They've not wanted to invest in the infrastructure to improve the technology, and that's why really their businesses have gone scale. Whereas ours is constantly innovating. We're constantly trying to find better ways to serve our clients so that we can do things in a better way and a more efficient way to save them time and save them fees. And the other thing I'd say is anyone can do it. One of the reasons that I was glad to have received the Businesswoman of the Year award was really because I wanted to prove that anyone can make it in business. I'm from a council estate. I was never giving anything. I went to a comprehensive school. I'm 33 years old now. And we run, as I say, an accountancy practice over 4 sites. I employ nearly 30 people. There's nothing that you can't do if you put your mind to it. My eventual goal is to make it into the top 100 accountancy firms in the country. And I do believe if I manage to do that, then I will be the only female sole director to have done that in one lifetime. Because generally they're multi-practitioner firms, usually male-led, and usually sort of been going for several generations before such time as they receive that accolade. So I would like to do it to prove to any young person generally, but also specifically young women, that they can make it in financial services or indeed any industry they choose.
I think that's hugely important because a lot of people, especially men in the profession, have said that there is an underrepresentation of women within financial services. So I think it's absolutely integral that we start to see more of an intake in future. And again, if we think about the future, before we do wrap things up on the programme today, Joanna, do give me an idea of what you envision the next year holding for yourself and for Bell's Accountants, and also tell me what you hope to achieve, not just in that time, but also beyond the COVID-19 pandemic as well.
Absolutely. So initially what we're looking to do for the next 12 months is just really cement the relationship we have with our clients, which is already very strong and very close. We're not one of those once-a-year accountants where we just produce figures in hindsight. We're very much involved in producing management accounts, cash flow forecasts, business advisory services to help our customers to grow, because obviously the more they grow, the more fees that they are paying to us, and they're recommending other clients to us, which is fantastic. So we want them to succeed because that benefits us also. But mainly for us, it's about cementing those relationships to make sure that we are the go-to people to help them through this situation. We are in a unique position as accountants where we're seeing their numbers live. We can advise them on how they can make more profits if their debtors are increasing and they need to do some more work on credit control and all those things. The right accountant can literally mean the difference between success and failure. So right now, that role, we're taking it more seriously than we ever were. So that's a very important part of the next 12 months, I think, during the pandemic. And then after that, it's about continued growth. So we're looking to reach as many people as we can. Another one of the benefits of us putting the infrastructure in place to all work remotely is that we have embraced the technology even more than we were doing before, which has meant that we are now confident we could serve a customer anywhere in the country, because we don't need to be able to see them face to face. We can do everything remotely. We can set them up with technology such as Receipt Bank, where they can take photographs of all their receipts on their phone, and that will come through to us, so we can process them our end. And we can have Zoom meetings, so it's as though we're face to face. So that to me is quite exciting because it's opened up a future where we're not localised. We're not restricted to just the people in the local area. We can help people a lot more further afield than that. And that to me would be what we're looking to achieve, a more national marketing campaign in the months following the pandemic.
Certainly seems as if there's a great deal of ambition there, even amid all of the uncertainty, Joanna. And what I think would actually be fantastic for the listeners who've tuned into this is if when we start to see those hopes borne out over the next few months, we can maybe have you back on the air and actually catch up on how the business is getting on. But even though we are just about out of time today, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the programme with us. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on and speak with me for the listeners' benefit. It's been a huge pleasure.
Not at all, Scott. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I very much enjoyed speaking to you and reflecting on our experiences. And if it can help someone else, then all the better.
I think it certainly will. For anybody tuning into this today, I have to say some of the advice here would be very, very well to heed. And also, Joanna, before you do go, do continue to stay safe and take care with everything still going on, because it is still very difficult times that we're living in, of course.
Absolutely. You too, Scott. Thanks again for the call.
Thanks ever so much. That was Joanne Bell, an accountant and director at Bell's Accountants in Kent. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with England's 1966 Football World Cup hero, Sir Geoff Hurst, a former professional footballer who played as a striker. Sir Geoff has scored over 200 league goals during his club career for the likes of West Ham United and Stoke City. But notably, he remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in the final of a World Cup following his treble in England's 4-2 win over West Germany at the old Wembley Stadium 54 long years ago now. I hope you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking with Geoff, and that's coming up next.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, who realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over 50 years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he had worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that of that calibre can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life, and that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham, and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved and what a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bobby Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era, I was involved for 6 or 7 years. It was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at times you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in the organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team, or certainly in the squad, and surprising they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Allen. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he'd moved one or two players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players. And great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course, I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited, just had a glance round,
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you into. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely. But I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then. But we.
Well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him, so I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic, and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff. I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke. and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitches, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is need to have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today, easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson is just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
That's a good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that, so many, and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long, long, long time. And I wouldn't, when you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding. And I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many, many times for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.